What if I told you that the fastest woman who ever lived ran her record-breaking race under conditions that should have made it impossible to count? Stay with me on this one, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at one of the most celebrated moments in Olympic history in a completely different way. There is a number connected to this story that has never been repeated by anyone, anywhere, in over 35 years. And there's a piece of equipment connected to that number that the man operating it admitted on record he did not fully trust. If you want to know how a single machine, possibly pointed in the wrong direction, may have created a legend that nobody has ever been able to catch, keep watching, because the deeper we go into this, the stranger it gets. And if stories like this are the kind of thing you enjoy, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now before we start, because there's a lot more digging where this came from. Let's set the scene. The year is 1988. The place is Indianapolis, Indiana. The event is the United States Olympic Trials, the meet that decides who gets to represent the country in Seoul later that summer. Among the women competing in the 100 meters is a sprinter who is already known in the sport, already respected, already fast, but not yet a household name on the level she was about to become. Her personal best in the 100 meters going into that season sits at just under 11 seconds, a very strong time, the kind of time that gets you onto international podiums, but nowhere near a world record. The world record at that point belongs to another American sprinter, a mark that had stood since the middle of the decade. That is the target. That is the number everyone assumes is safe for a while longer. Then comes the afternoon of July 16th, in one of the qualifying rounds. She crosses the finish line, and the clock stops at a time that nobody expected, a time that instantly becomes the fastest a woman had ever run the 100 meters by a margin so large that track and field experts could barely process it. We are talking about an improvement over her own previous best that is almost unheard of at the elite level, where careers are built on shaving off hundredths of a second over years, not nearly half a second in a single afternoon. People in the stands are stunned. Commentators are stunned. And almost immediately, a question starts circulating that has never fully gone away. How? Here's where the suspense really starts. So pay close attention, because this next part is the heart of the whole mystery. In sprinting, wind matters enormously. A strong tailwind can shave fractions of a second off a runner's time, without the runner doing anything different at all, which is exactly why the sport's governing body set a strict legal limit on tailwind speed decades earlier. Anything above that limit, and the time simply does not count as a record, no matter how fast the clock reads. On that particular July afternoon in Indianapolis, the wind was not gentle. It was blowing hard enough that flags above the stadium were visibly whipping around all day. In the 30 minutes leading up to the race in question, 4 separate races were run, and every single one of them recorded wind readings well above the legal limit. Illegal wind, illegal wind, illegal wind, illegal wind. And then, right in the middle of that pattern, in exact 2 races with a record-breaking run, and several other surprisingly fast times happened, the official wind gauge reads exactly 0, not slightly under the limit, 0. And then, in the very next race immediately afterward, the reading jumps right back up to a number far above the legal limit again. Think about that pattern for a second, because it is genuinely strange when you lay out like that. Windy, 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 then suddenly nothing at all, then windy again. It is almost as if for about 10 minutes, the wind simply stopped existing on that one stretch of track, and then started right back up the moment those 2 races were finished. Even people working at the event that day noticed how odd this looked. One of the official meet publications at the time went so far as to suggest that a different, slower race run later that day, one with a verified legal wind reading, should actually be considered the more legitimate elite performance, because the doubts about that 0 reading were already circulating before the day was even over. Now here is something most retellings of this story leave out entirely, and it might be the most important detail in the whole thing. The man responsible for operating the timing and wind measurement equipment that day was an experienced professional who had worked on Olympic-level timing systems since the early 1970s, employed by one of the most trusted names in the entire sports timing industry. This was not some rookie mistake at a small regional meet. After the race, officials and reporters wanted answers, and he was brought in to explain the 0 reading. And what he reportedly said was that he himself was surprised to see 0.0 appear on the board, and that the equipment may not have been able to accurately capture what the athletes were actually experiencing out on the track in that moment. Read that again. The man running the official equipment, on the day of the most famous sprint record in history, essentially admitted he didn't fully trust the number it produced. So, what actually went wrong with the machine? Years later, in the mid-1990s, a sports scientist took a serious academic look at exactly this question, and his analysis suggested that the wind gauge may have been angled incorrectly relative to the direction of the track, off by something in the neighborhood of 60 degrees, specifically during those two suspicious races. According to that analysis, what was really a wind blowing at a much shallower angle, with a real tailwind component that should have boosted times, may have been getting misread by the instrument as a wind blowing almost directly sideways across the track, which the equipment is designed to register very differently. If that explanation is correct, it would mean a simple positioning error on a single sensor, just a matter of degrees, may have decided whether the most iconic women's sprinting record of all time was ever allowed to exist in the first place. And right after those two races, the equipment was apparently adjusted, because the very next reading shot straight back up into illegal territory. But the strangeness doesn't stop with one runner. Look at who else was on the track during those exact same two races. The runner who finished as a hinder in one of those heats ran a time that was a massive improvement over what she had run only hours earlier that same day, an improvement she would never come close to repeating in any race afterward, before or after that day. Another competitor in that race posted her best time of the entire season. A third competitor recorded the only sub-11-second time of her career under legal conditions ever, before or since. So in the span of these two specific races, you have one all-time world record, plus multiple athletes hitting lifetime or season bests they never matched again, all happening on the only two readings of the entire day that came back at zero, surrounded on every side by races with wind speeds well above the legal cutoff. If you're starting to feel a little uneasy about how convenient that timing is, you're not the only one. And we are not even at the part of this story people usually find most controversial yet. So stick around. Because here is the other half of this puzzle. Her improvement. That season wasn't limited to the 100 meters. She also broke the world record in the 200 meters that same year, a jump of close to 3% over her own previous best, which on its own would be remarkable, but combined with the 100-meter result, paint a picture of an athlete who transformed almost overnight. Her own camp pointed to an intense new training regimen, dietary changes, and a now famous claim of thousands of sit-ups every single day as the explanation. People who followed her career also noticed a visible change in her physique between the mid-1980s and 1988, a noticeably more muscular build than she had carried just a few years earlier. She never failed a drug test during her competitive career, and that remains the official record to this day. But here's the detail that keeps this story alive decades later. Barely a year after that historic season, far more rigorous and widespread random drug testing began rolling out across international athletics, and she retired from competition that same year and never raced again at that level. Make of that timing what you will. And then there's the ending of this story, which somehow manages to add even more weight to the mystery rather than resolve it. She passed away in September of 1998 at only 38 years old, the result of a sudden seizure linked to a brain condition she had apparently carried, unknowingly, her entire life. A full autopsy was conducted, specifically looking for any trace of performance-enhancing substances in her system. Nothing was found. No organization, then or since, has ever produced a confirmed positive test bearing her name. So whatever the truth actually is, it did not come out in that final examination, and it has never come out anywhere else either. So here's where all this leaves us, and I want you to sit with this number for a second before we go. Since fully electronic timing was introduced into the sport in the late 1960s, this is still the only women's world record in the 100 meters ever set with an official wind reading of precisely 0.0 on a day when literally every other race around it broke the legal wind limit. A misalignment in the equipment that a published scientific analysis years later suggested may have existed. A timing operator who admitted on the record that he doubted his own machine's reading. A cluster of suspiciously perfect performances by multiple different athletes, all crammed into the only two races of the day with that exact zero reading. And more than 35 years later, In a sport obsessed with shaving off hundredths of a second, no woman on earth has come within real striking distance of that time. Not one. Is that simply what generational, once-in-a-lifetime talent looks like? Or is there something about that 10-minute window on July 16th, 1988, that we still don't fully understand? I think there's more to find here. And if you do too, make sure you're subscribed, because there are a few more threads in this story worth pulling, and I am not done digging.